So
we just have ourselves in full glorious technicolor.
Great. What a good system. Okay, perfect.
Absolutely terrifying. Oh yeah, 4+4. Yeah, we're dead on time. It's remarkable. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry it's not a bigger room, but it's lovely to have a packed APPG, as is often the case with cycling and walking. And it is an absolute pleasure to welcome the Minister of State for Decarbonization. Can we turn off the sound so I'm not talking back at myself, please? The Minister of State, Decarbonisation and Technology from the Department of Transport, Jessie Norman MP. Thank you so much for joining us. And within his brief is active travel. And so Jessie has held this brief before, so it's welcome back. And hopefully we've been busy moving more since we saw you last in this brief. And we're very much looking forward to hearing from Jessie about what he's been up to, what's happening with pavement parking, which I know is a particularly hot topic, before we head into the masses of questions that have already been submitted. So, good. Without further ado.
Well, let's say thank you so much, and how absolutely fantastic it is to be back in front of an active travel audience and on this brief. And I think there was no disguising my joy when I returned to the DFT. And I'd like to think that was reciprocated on behalf of officials, but they may have been a kind of, here we go again, kind of rolled eyes moment. Because it's fantastic to be back on this brief. I mean, we all know how important active travel is, and you can be cycling, you can be walking, you can be wheeling, you can be completely, as it were, youthful and exuberant, or you can be older, or you can have a disability and still enjoy all of this activity in different ways, and technology is coming to aid increasingly in that area. And so it's a very live and vibrant part of our transport system, and it's had a big boost in support from central government recently, and that's great. But we also did quite a lot when I was last. Here's Andrew Slew, who has played an important role himself in this, of course, from the parliamentary side. And we did quite a lot when I was at GFT last. Of course, as you will know, we did all the work on LSWIPs and did safety work, and did work on hierarchy of users and the highway code and all the rest of it. And so that was all good. But I am delighted to see how much this agenda has moved forward over the last couple of years, and thrilled to be able to pick it up in the way that we have done. I know you've got an awful lot of questions, but I hope you know. I mean, I don't know how many ministers have almost never used a ministerial car, but I think I'm probably amongst them. The reason is because I'm on my bicycle, and I don't do that just because I love biking, but also because it's the best way to get around town, and it's the best way. That could be London or it can be Hereford. I wouldn't say rural areas always, but it is nevertheless a fantastic way to stay fit and make a minimal impact on the environment and keep your limbs moving and the mind active. And here's Ben about active minds. So let me take your questions and pick up any issues that you want to go with. And let me thank you, Selene, and Ruth, and Fabian, and Ben, and Andrew, and the other members of the APPG for all of that. And the grandfather, the great-grandfather himself, Lord Young, lovely to see you. The original cycling minister from whose example we all take our lead. And I've got on my right, and you can't all see him in the room, but you hopefully see him online, the legendary Danny Williams. And there couldn't be a better indication of the seriousness of the government has increased its commitment to active travel than Active Travel England. And we've got Chris Boardman as chair, fantastic. Worked with Chris a lot when I was a minister, and still now again. And we've got Danny as chief executive. And so there is a kind of energy and impetus and a focus and a quality about the work that I think they will be bringing to the process, which is incredibly exciting. And as you know, the no less legendary Brian Deegan is also intimately involved in this process. And so we look forward to Brian invigilating the quality of our schemes up and down the country. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, as I'm sat here, I'm going to ask the first question, which was, what is happening with pavement parking consultation, please?
Listen, this is something close to my heart as it is to yours. And as you know, we've consulted on it and thought extensively about it. There have been different options. And the view that I've taken has been that we should have a clear route forward legislatively, if legislation is the route we need, before we publish the results of the consultation. And so I imagine that we'll have some, and I expect that we'll have some guidance on that fairly shortly. Obviously, government in this iteration is at least relatively new and is getting its legislative priorities sorted out. But that is definitely something that I care a lot about, and I know how important it is to many of the people in this room.
And many people, indeed,
And
and the
many
Express.
people.
I think 3/4 of the respondents wanted it sorted out.
Yes.
So I'm going to come to Ruth next, and then to Ben, and then to Fabian. And any other parliamentarians in the room itching to ask a question, please do get your fingers ready. But Ruth.
Okay, thank you, Soleil. Ruth Cadbury, fellow co-chair of the APPG, and it's been a bit of a feeling of deja vu for us.
All over again.
Well, it's good to see you back in the role, because it's good to be working with a minister who knows the brief and understands the issues, and also knows many of us in the room. My question is a crossing silo boundaries question. The National Planning Policy Framework document, which I think is the responsibility of DLUC, the draft that's I think being consulted on now, the very current one, is all about housing numbers, and there's nothing in there about transport, and yet so much proposed and potential new development is on the edge of towns and villages and rural areas and so on, and there's nothing, as I say, about transport. And once new developments get built or get planning permission even, there's nothing, you can't go backwards to address the transport deficit. And almost by definition, if you don't, all new developments tend to be car-borne, except in central cities. So what role do you in your position and the Department of Transport have to ensure that DLUC actually has a rethink on this?
Well, thank you for the question very much. I can't help noticing for answer that one of the joys of the cycling APPG is that everyone is so fit that whatever their age, they can tie themselves into various knots in a tiny room. It's absolutely general level of fitness of the APPG members and their supporters. On this, look, officials work very closely with DLUC, and rightly so for all the reasons you've described. Now, we don't get to set DLUC policy, but we get to. But I think the key move that I would flag on this is the move we've made to make ATE a statutory consultee for planning purposes, because that means that you are going to have this perspective built into or at least by default built into new schemes, and that is an important aspect of making sure that these things are all cycling and walking friendly. I've got the Chief Executive to my right, Danny. I don't know if this is a moment where you'd like to say something, but
I'll add to that. So the Chief Planner for England, sorry for the people on the screen, I'm having to talk around the screen. The Chief Planner for England emailed all planners around the country on Friday announcing that we're going to be come a StatCon later this year. DLUC is laying the SI for that, I think, in 2 weeks' time. In terms of operationally, we have our director of planning now in place. We're starting to talk particularly to developers first, and we will be doing a roadshow around all of the local authorities through the year. That kicks off in a couple of weeks. So we're announcing local planners and local developers to come talk to us. Operationally, it's very much about starting at the top of the tree. So investors, planners, and local authorities all together.
I mean, that's so much a better answer than I gave that I don't know why I'm talking. I don't know. Just hand it over to Danny.
Can I put in a plea from an MP point of view? When it comes to North Devon, please let me know. And I'm sure many other MPs feel the same, that actually for us to make a difference, it does need driving.
Our brand new head of regional engagement, Orla, is in the room. She started today.
All our hands up. That's perfectly clear. I'm calling you out. Excellent.
We'd
MPs
like-
from our log.
And she will be phoned.
Okay, so my list of questions I'm going Ben, Fabian, and then Andrew. Okay, so I have got a list. Ben.
I'm sorry I missed this, but I think I've just heard you both confirm that Active Travel England will be a statutory consultee, contrary to what Simon Clark indicated when he was briefly in that job a few months ago. Excellent. On pavement parking, you've had more than 2 years to respond to the consultation. That's a long time.
Yeah.
So please get on with it. You'd have cross-party support. You could get this through very quickly. You could claim it as a win, and goodness knows you're going to need a few wins in the next 18 months if you're going to show it publicly you're actually doing anything in government. The other question is, this may have also been resolved. Have you signed off the latest round of funding for?
Well, there are 2 rounds of funding. So there's capability funding, which I think you know has been signed off and announced, and there's Active Travel 4 funding, which is, I think, soon to very soon will be the description of what we're doing. Well, soon / very soon. We're very close.
Your predecessors have actually signed it off, but we seem to be back at square one again on that.
I don't think it was anywhere near square one, Ben. And in case you hadn't noticed, Active Travel is an area in which we've got a succession of great wins, which come to be happily talking about over the next 18 months.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you.
Fabian.
Fabian Hamilton, MP for Leeds North East, active cyclist. Jesse, can I just ask you about rail cycle integration? Because every single week I cycle to the station in Leeds, put my bike on the train and cycle from King's Cross. Normally it works absolutely fine, but all the rail companies have different policies now. Sometimes you arrive at a station, you're told you have to leave the station, go into the booking office, get your booking, and then you can't because the train's late and the computer's already thinks the train has left. It is an absolute nightmare getting around the country with a bicycle on a train. And I wondered what the government is able to do about this, because it's so fragmented. It makes it really, really difficult, and you have to be very determined to want to continue. Thank you for the question. The answer to that is I'm not really cited on the latest state of affairs with that. I fully recognise the point. I get the point about lack of integration. I think it's also an issue of capacity. Steadily increasing capacity overall and within operators, I think, is required in order to continue the process of support. Can I interrupt you there for a second, Jesse? Because every time I'm told you can't put your bike on the train, eventually when I argue, they say, oh, okay, see the guard. There's no other bike on the train. So it's not about capacity, it's about bureaucracy and lack of integration and lack of willingness to accommodate something. It may be about perceived capacity. Yeah. Don't forget, capacity, the way it's measured by those companies is different from what the capacity may actually be. Is there something you want to say about that? Okay, good. Sorry.
Can I come back to Ruth's excellent first question? I mean, I never ever want to see again a large housing development in this country which does not have cycle routes through to the local primary school, the local secondary school, the shops, and the employment area. And if we're actually remotely serious about driving down type 2 diabetes and keeping a few of our older people a bit fitter for longer, we've got to design this in. It's just terrible that it hasn't. So I'm really, statutory consultation sounds great, but it's got to have some teeth. But it's actually a selling point. You look at the developers' posters for new housing developments. They have happy families cycling along. People want to buy into a healthy lifestyle. It should be an open door, this. And if we're actually serious about health, about air quality, about mental well-being, about getting to places on time, just do it. Make sure it happens. I agree with you about that. I think it is a selling point, and I think there is often a nudge in perception where people collectively come to understand that the norm has changed, and that is the right way to go. So I couldn't agree with you more. I do think statutory consultation is a big move. Ben's recognised it. We'll have to see how that gets used by ATE. I would also say that a lot of the work that's been done at the moment is about giving councils more ability to guide active travel in relation to schools and other areas. That's quite a big function and support things. I think we're seeing quite a lot of progress in that area.
Yeah. I can.
Well, we obviously are.
Shorthand one. So just to back up those points. Firstly, in terms of resources, we're resourcing up quite fast in planning, which is great. And for us at the moment, it's about conversations that we need to have particularly with developers, but also with local authorities. Happy to say that so far developers are very open to talking to us, which is good. And I think they're finding it quite interesting that conversation is happening in the first place. I think, I don't want to say watch this space with expectation, but it is about building those bricks with them together. Schools is absolutely critical. We'll be launching some new tools very soon, actually. So many of you may have heard of the propensity to cycle tool, which we use a lot. We have a propensity to walk or cycle to school tool that we're going to launch very, very soon together with our colleagues at DFE. And that's super exciting because it will be a little bit like a spider map for a bus stop. You can see literally where each pupil is coming from, and that will work together with developers, with councils on where should you put that zebra crossing or similar, and really try and help make the route to school a lot safer and easier so that your kids can walk to school on their own, maybe.
and cyclists.
I mean, that's absolutely fair. Can I say one other thing, which is the point about health is absolutely fundamental. We need to keep coming back to that. Obviously, we've got a move towards more social prescribing. It's not my brief specifically, but I can tell you I want to do a lot more in that area. And I do think that at some point, people are going to start doing cohort studies of people who cycle versus people who don't at different ages. And what they discover is that, you know, it adds 10 years of your life. And famously, every hour you cycle is an hour you save at the end of your life. So, you know, there's no net loss. Did you want to say something?
I did. It's only because I'm a GP.
Well, I'm not the chair, but the chair.
I have blocked this gentleman, but just before we come to him, if I could just follow up on that point about our lovely councils. So in rural North Devon, we have multi-tiers of councils, and just getting a road built in a new development is a challenge, let alone, and I think how we tackle this actually at a practical level, whilst it sounds fantastic, just the reality of it. And I'd also like to overlay, while I have the opportunity, and I believe the minister will be joining me for a debate on the subject fairly soon, is just so he kind of heads up, is on how you deal with rurality within the decision-making process for active travel plans, because actually, obviously, usage is much less in rural Britain. And where I am, we don't have as many people as even where Ben is down at the south of my county. So
two things to come back on. One is on the planning, there is work in progress, which I can't really talk about, but we're thinking about that, particularly around adoption of roads and so on. On the rural point, the next funding round will specifically look to include rural in a way that it hasn't recently.
that is marvellous news to my ears. So the GP, I hope you get such good news.
Yeah, so William Bird, I'm a GP and Chief Executive of Intelligent Health.
Are you a cyclist?
I'm a cyclist. Yes, I am a cyclist indeed. And but a walker. My great thing about walking, and I've been promoting that for 30 years through Department of Health, and they get physical activity embedded in the Department of Health and NHS. And I think we're getting there. The social prescribing is great. The fact we've got those 10 areas doing it all over many. What I'm just going to ask are just two questions, and they're kind of related. One of them is how strategically can active travelling work with the ICBs as they're looking at place areas and making sure that that's going to be absolutely fully, rather than just on the edge, which is where it's been for so long. There needs to be a complete mindset shift. Physical activity and actually Sport England, and luckily you've got the chair of both in there, has managed to get in there, and we've got really good connections there. The second question is, and it's related, is the split between capital and revenue. We often find that capital gets the big lion's share, and then you get empty cycle lanes, and you don't get the, we have to use the revenue, and that fits in with health, and that's where health can really help. So I really just wanted to know how you're going to do it, but also, are we going to be careful about not making it all capital projects, not revenue?
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Ken, before I hand over to Danny on the first question, ACB's placemaking, active travel, and that relation, can we just go to the point you were just raising at your second question? I do think that we're at a particular moment in kind of the development of what we're thinking here, where we really ought to address that issue much more centrally than we are at the moment. It should be a focus for us going forward.
Coming to the first question, we are in conversations now with different parts of NHS England and with colleagues at OHID, and again, it's a case of waiting a little bit for us to come up with a joint strategy, but we are developing that at pace at the moment, and more will follow on that probably after the spring.
I mean, the chair of active travelling has been very actively lobbied by the chair of Sport England as we speak.
But we're essentially working out frameworks for that at the moment, and then we'll be able to talk more.
Well, I think we're at the beginning of this process. I mean, these 10 areas are great, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't try to turn the dial up to 11.
And make sure NHS England are receptive as well.
Well, of course, and of course, we have to bring colleagues with us. But there are plenty of people at the top of NHS England. I mean, Chris Whitty would be one who are very, very strong supporters of this agenda.
Are there any more questions in the room? Gentleman at the back.
David, welcome back to the department.
David, my friend, how are you? Lovely to see you.
So when you were here last, you were road safety minister for a month now.
Yes.
And you pushed through, you were the architect of the 19 road safety framework.
Yep.
You know, it's had a successive photograph on it.
It's the fate of my life.
You appreciate the fantastic work that Travel England will be doing will be undermined if we do not have comprehensive road safety strategy, for tackling things like drink driving, speeding. Our vehicle safety standards now are well beyond those that actually were not updated them. I mean, the road policing review is going for 2 years and more. We haven't had any outcomes. Other consultations outcomes. Is there going to be a good, comprehensive, ambitious road safety strategy soon?
And can I add an addendum to that, which is, will you do more to publicise the very positive changes to the highway code? Because
okay, thank you. So road safety and more positive changes to the highway code. On the highway code, yes, absolutely, that's a bit in my brief, and indeed, I mean, ish, and was the thing I steered through. One of the things I steered through last year on road safety. I mean, I'm not going to start tying my colleagues up in knots, but I absolutely take the point that you make, and I don't need to tell you we think a lot about road safety, and of course we think about it not just in terms of current cars, but also future of transport, and also, you know, other forms of mobility, micro-mobility, and the rest of it, all of which contribute to a safe road environment.
We come to Andrew Salute, and then the lady at the back, and then the lady in the middle.
Thanks, Elaine, very much for one second quick one of the cherry. Jesse, can I ask about cycle storage and parking and security? There are many small flats, so small now that you can't actually store a bike. There are all these bossy notices about not blocking out the stairwell. So that is a big issue. Parking is often very difficult to find someone to park your bike at all. That's the biggest incentive. At my railway station in Leighton Buzzard, there's an epidemic of bike theft. You can actually design this stuff out. We need the railway stations to get serious about secure parking. You know, we need more secure parking. I've had my bike stolen in London, and I've lots of constituents. I don't think the police take it seriously enough, actually. You know, it comes from youngsters to commuters all the way through. So you know how to park securely, design it out, really proper advice. You know, it's not just up to the police, but there's a big issue where you keep your bike and where you're going to push it when you get somewhere.
I mean, that's absolutely right. There is an issue on both fronts. I do think that, I mean, funding in the past, you know, has focused in parts on those kinds of schemes, sitting next to stations to try to improve it. It'd be better to get more time, more buy-in from Network Rail and other ways. I don't know if Danny's going to comment, but let me just say one other thing. Obviously, you do have more options for folding bikes now than you had 2 or 3 years ago. So, you know, and they're better price points. So we're starting to get, as it were, nationally closer to be able to accommodate some of those concerns without necessarily putting in a lot of new infrastructure.
The lady at the back in green.
Thank you. I'm still I'm very British Railways. And are you aware that we've got 5 strategic rail? We got good feedback on this. I think it came very, very clearly in the 307 response that we should add help in 5 strategic objectives rail. At the moment, that hasn't gone in. That's I'm not in discussion based on that you and your colleagues included. So I'm working with integrated transport, and it really helped your case.
Right, so can health be included as a strategic objective for rail? The answer to that is a mixture of good and bad news. The bad news first, which is nothing to do with me directly, but I take the point. The good news is the person to your right is my private secretary, who can make a note of this and make sure that it's not by the rail minister.
Thank you. The lady in the middle.
Yeah, so it's
Oh. Good. I'll come to you next. Okay. Lady in the middle. Sorry, not knowing everyone's names.
My name's Sally Poplar from Sustrans with a national.
Sustrans, excellent. Give Xavier my best. He's still there. Yeah, very good. Yep.
You might be on the line then. You probably know this already, but we have a disabled citizens inquiry coming out on February the 8th. But one of the things that we've been doing with that, we've been working with disabled people and disabled people's-led organisations to produce that work. One of the key asks, you know, disabled people do not have the same access to walking and wheeling as non-disabled people. I'd be really keen to hear what your thoughts and what your plans are for engaging disabled people fully in transport planning decisions, particularly around walking.
I think that's a great question. I think I'm right in saying, I've got a note here, but I think I'm right in saying we've got an inclusive cycling group that actually focuses on specifically those concerns, and rightly so. I think the electrification revolution that's taking place in mobility at the moment is absolutely something that we should be directing the most attention to, and especially in relation to the opportunity to help people with disabilities, because it's potentially transformative. And I don't just mean e-bikes, I mean lots of different forms of adaptations that can be made that would help people with disabilities to be able to use it. So I absolutely welcome the study that you're doing. I look forward to reading it, and thank you very much indeed for that.
And to the lady at the back.
So Lucy Martin from TFL, on the street samples. Really interesting to hear about the schools cycle. Cycling tool, very exciting. Does it cover London? It's my first question. Yeah, I really welcome that, because obviously now we've got close to school making up the same work. So this is more important. And the second question I had is, yeah, what, in terms of the balance of funding, it's still very skewed to the that sheet. Could you, provide some what's the kind of logic, I suppose, in the distribution of funding between recycling and rates for primary information?
Well, that is a very profound philosophical question. I mean, of course, this country is uses roads for many different reasons, and it has regional road networks, major road networks, local roads, and it's got 31 million people, over 31 million cars on the roads belonging to different people who have expectations about how they're going to travel. And so what we're in the process of doing is giving them alternatives that are safer and greener, and, or if possible, as safe as possible, certainly greener and more healthy, and with a lower impact in other ways, air quality and the rest. And the massive increase that we've seen in the last couple of years in investment in this area is testimony to the kind of ambition we've got. So I don't think we're at the end of the process by any means. But we ought to be aware that there is benefit. You know, cyclists use roads, and very often they need good quality road surfaces. They need to have road surfaces that work for other road users in a way that preserves safety. In our national networks, we need to have schemes alongside those roads that support cycling and walking and wheeling and active travel. And so there should be a degree of overlap and serendipity there. Now for London tools, I hand over to
me. Yeah, the tools will be national, up to London what it does with them, obviously. May I just come back on the disability point? I think there may be a perception that Active Travel England is about cycling. The good news or the bad news is it's going to be isn't. We're very definitely about walking and wheeling, and that's absolutely critical. And I think really walking and wheeling are going to do the heavy lifting for us, not cycling. You'll see a shift in focus from maybe what's been done in the past, and you'll also see some very definite and deliberate focus on disabled users and on inclusivity in general. And some of you in this room have had conversations with me about that, and there will be more publicly quite soon.
I mean, that is music to my ears. And I'll say one other thing, which is that, as you'll be aware, one of those kind of light bulb moments for anyone who thinks hard about this area is the degree of overlap between, you know, the cycling and walking and wheeling agendas. So one has to recognize difference, but one also has to understand a commonality and plan on that basis. And you know, Transport for London is a perfect example.
Okay, I've got a lady here and a gentleman in the back that I promised, but the next gentleman, I'm going to have to go to some pre-asked questions because we actually have quite a lot of people who asked in advance. So if we can keep them brief. The lady here, and then I'll come into the back.
So it's Emily Cherry, Chief Executive Disability. Welcome back.
Hello, lovely to see you. Hello, thank you very much.
And fantastic. And I think there's a couple of things for us. So firstly, to really recognise the rapid progress that Danny and team are making at ACE, and that's really, really welcome and support us out of training. So it's great to hear you also echo that particularly. And I hope you're also going to be pleased, as Minister, that you authorised last time an approved driving instructor, driver savvy driving training programme, which is now completed and piloted and finished.
Excellent.
Which is fantastic. And it's showing some really good results really in really changing the way that ADIs want to teach learner drivers around cyclist behaviour, and that's a fantastic piece of work. I just want to pick up the highway code question again, because we're still hearing massively from parents and children from schools that driver behaviour and lack of awareness of real positive changes that highway code made is something that's still preventing that from the parents really allowing children to walk and cycle safely to school. So will there be?
Well, I mean, again, thank you for that. Thank you for your kind words about bikeability and our role in it. And also, I mean, I take the point you make about highway code. I haven't looked at the formal levels of uptake or recognition of the changes that have been made, but clearly we need to do that. And let's keep revisiting and bearing down on that.
Lovely. And then the gentleman at the back and your neighbour, I'll come back to you after we've done a few of the other questions. There.
Thank you very much. Ian Woolwich, Conservative for Cycling, and also from the East County Councillor.
Hello.
There. 580,000 population, but we're rural. We've had rain, we've had ice, we've had rain again, lots of floods. And my email was full of people complaining about potholes, which are unfortunately right. The question is about giving revenue funding, not just a pothole fund, because what happens with that is only spent on roads. But trying to prioritise active travel support for maintenance of our routes, footpaths, and a road crossing, just where it's got studs by a controlled crossing, it's deemed part of the road, but it needs a better standard for people to be able to walk across that particular road. So there are too many, I feel, too many criteria that is put on potholes, and it should be more to do with for people to walk and wheel. And that funding needs to be ring-fenced, I believe. I'm asking if you could, please, just for active travel maintenance.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So there's a whole bunch of different questions just wrapped up in what you're saying. Let's just unpick some of them and I'll hand over to Danny. So I take the point you make very much about maintenance versus capital spend. One thing I didn't mention earlier, which I think is really important, is the capability money that we've put in active travel, because that actually allows local authorities to build a more nuanced understanding of what they have. And what they have is an asset, and the asset needs to be built properly and then needs to be preserved as an asset over time. If you don't have that asset-based view, it's very hard to do the right thing. It applies to potholes, which of course are a menace for cyclists. I crack my head without luckily any, at least any harm anyone's prepared to tell me about. On a pothole about 200 yards away from here a couple of years ago on Parliament Square. So believe me, I understand the value of potholes, cycling standpoint, or the disvalue of them. But the other thing just to say is, so you want to have that mentality, and you also want to have, as well as the right spread between the capital maintenance sides. I think if the St. J. Brian Deegan were in this room, he would tell us that the right treatment for a road from an active travel standpoint is often the right treatment for every person using the road, whatever the form of transport they're using. And so there is an opportunity in some of these areas to just have a new view that actually brings best thinking to the table and makes it a genuinely successful, effective ecosystem for everyone using it.
So as a East Sussex resident, I'll as well, I'm very aware of our pothole situation, but I think it's also an area where we're going to produce some guidance quite soon, because it's rising up our ladder of things that we need to help people understand how to navigate. And there's going to be quite a lot of guidance coming out from ATE, not in the form of like hefty tomes, but more how can we help councillors know where to direct their officers and things like that. So that's coming relatively soon.
Thank you. So I've got coming back to some of the pre-submitted questions. Funding for active travel is subject to annual funding pots and local decision making. Does active travel need a national plan in the same way that National Highways does? And will future active travel settlements be multi-year? So Adam Tranter, who works up in the West Midlands, the feedback from up there is that we really will thrive with the long-term security to be able to develop high-quality schemes in a pipeline and retain the best talent.
I mean, I think that's been a dream for a long time, and there have been places where money has been available in a way that's multi-year within cities, and it seems to have been used, often in an effective, interesting, and useful way. So, absolutely, I think at this point the key measure is to make sure that the money we've got is as effectively invested as it can be, show we can scale up, show we can deliver quality, and continue to make the case for more strategic and more multi-year approach.
Thank you.
I don't think you can say anything because you're potentially recipient. Yep.
What role should National Highways play in active travel, and should it be working more closely with Active Travel England?
I'm a big believer that National Highways, I mean, Danny can talk about the relationship between National Highways and Active Travel England, but I'm a big believer that National Highways has got a large role to play in this area. It obviously does have designated funds which can be used for cycle schemes and can be used for other environmental and active travel purposes. I've always wanted to see more joined up linked activity, and I hope we can move towards that more now that we've got a statutory active travel body in place.
Yeah. So we're already working with National Highways on specific schemes where our inspectors are now working with them to make sure that they deliver the right product. And we are working a joint framework together of how we're going to interoperate. We'll narrow that down to 2 or 3 areas where we're going to work with them on how they might deploy those funds more usefully in the future.
Fantastic. And so we understand that Active Travel England have rated each local transport authority based on its capability to deliver active travel schemes. When will these ratings be published, and what will happen to local authorities that have a very low rating?
Well, it's so tempting for me to just pass this over to the man to my right, but I'm not going to do that. Listen, the idea is to bring in some positive incentive for local authorities to invest in their own active travel capability alongside the capability funding we're giving them. And so, there's no naughty step here, but there are some that are more expert than others, and the ones that are more expert will get more, and the ones that are less will get less, but they will also get support in order to allow them to move up that curve, because we want to see everyone at the top level we possibly can. Do you want to just
what he said, actually?
Okay.
Excellent. And so in light of the recent combined authorities devolution deal in the Northeast, how will Active Travel England interact with influence active travel schemes in the combined authorities?
I think it's him.
Yeah, that is. So we, some of you may know, we work very closely on LUF2 funds. So all LUF2 transport funds were assessed by the Active Travel England team last year. And we're looking to retain that kind of relationship with all future funds. We're obviously having discussions internally within the DFT about how we structure that, but we'll be part of COSTS funds and combined authority work going forward.
Fantastic. So are you able to give us an update on the historic rail estate, as there are potentially great routes for rural active travel? And related, in places where that historic rail estate, people want to reopen a railway on the bit that is now a fantastic active travel route because of the road congestion. How are those decisions going to be taken as well, where we're balancing potentially rail, which will take cars off the road, alongside active travel, which we know is so important?
And can I ask them further supplementary?
Yeah.
And what are you doing to stop National Highways closing down potential future heritage rail or active travel routes by concreting up old bridges or demolishing them?
Well, if you talk, I mean, 2 things on the latter point. If you talk to National Highways, they often regard bricking those sites up as ways of preserving them, bizarrely, but in case of future reopening, much better than, as it were,
They're not,
more
sorry, they're
plastic.
not, they're concreting.
Well. I think it's fair to say that they are sensitive to this issue. I certainly have raised it with them on many occasions. There are lots of local groups which do fantastic work in alerting Westminster as to what the concern is, and we kind of rely on those a little bit. In relation to the historic rail estate, obviously the regions do have their own LSWIPs, which are designed to help them identify priority routes. Those can involve the historic real estate. There is money available, I think, through Sustrans, or has been to support some of this stuff. And they obviously can apply through ATF to open those routes. So yes, I think there's tremendous opportunity there, but there is money available for that.
Yeah, that last point is important. I think in previous funding rounds, there wasn't funding to open up access or links to, particularly links to national cycle route networks or onto the historic real estate. There is now, but it will be.
And Selene's point about the competition.
Yeah, so it will be opportunity. So I can give you a live example. So the Barnstable to Bideford line has been closed for some time, but the traffic between the 2 towns actually makes London look quite free flowing. It's taking over an hour to do the 6 miles between Barnstable and Bideford in a car at the present time. But there's this lovely cycle trail, Tark Trail, which is where the train used to go. And I have a group wanting to build a railway. and a group wanted to retain their cycle path, and a lot of people wanted to get off the road. How are those conflicts going to be managed as we look to decarbonise our transport network?
I think we say best of luck, Selene, with the local authority planning process. Look, I mean, it's, you know, no parent wants to choose between their children, but it would be very nice to find a way of, of reaching a consensus that allows for proper long-term investment, takes the pressure off the boat.
I can't wait to take you to my county council. The gentleman in the room, because you must be bored of listening to me.
Yeah, so I'm Simon Russell, House of Court. In my experience, road traffic policing is an invasive species and is evaporating very, very quickly. All of these changes to the highway code, all of this new infrastructure, use if there is virtually no road traffic policing taking place anywhere in the country. So A, can I have a reaction to that? And B, why on earth aren't we using technology more intelligently to try and police behavior and to try and monitor it to make it safer for everyone?
I mean, so there's a number of responses I could give to that. One is the police are autonomous and we log your concern. The second, but we don't have a system in which parliamentarians instruct the police to do things, and rightly so, and other countries do, and I'm not sure it's always worked out well for them. And the second point is the APG on cycling, walking and active travel, not on road policing. And of course I accept the point you make, but about the need for effective enforcement on roads. We have got, I mean, people who are expert in this area, which I am not, would undoubtedly want to contest your characterization of it. I've certainly received, speeding tickets over the years in a way that does not suggest any slackening of effort by the constabulary. But I think the point should be allowed to remain one for us all to cogitate and ponder.
Thank you, Fabian.
Thank you for giving me another bite. Firstly, on Barnstable to Bideford, is there no way, I don't know the route, of actually having a train and a cycle track?
Not through the tunnels.
Right, okay, understood. My question though, Jessie, is this. We've had huge development in segregated cycle tracks, especially, for example, the one between Bradford and Leeds. The problem is they're not very well designed, they're not very well maintained, and they're certainly not, coming back to the point about policing, they're not policed in any way. So every single time I go, for example, from Pudsey to Leeds City Station, about 6.5 miles, there's always 2 or 3 vehicles parked on it. And when you tackle people who are parked on it, you get the most appalling abuse. But you've nowhere to go. You can't go onto the road because there's a curb. So my question is, are you thinking of having a national design standard for segregated cycleways? Because I think we need it. Secondly, what can be done about policing those cycleways by local authorities or by the police? And thirdly, what about maintenance? Because it's all very well building them, but if they're badly maintained and you're getting punctures and there's glass and goodness knows what, then they're as good as useless.
So thank you for that question. My own view is that, Danny may want to comment, but I can absolutely see the force of the argument about a national design standard. I do think that, in a way, to pick up the point that Russell raised, not in relation to roads, but in relation to cycle paths and tracks, there ought to be more awareness of that the rules of the road apply, as it were, and the highway code, etc., and good rules of proper cycling apply to that. And they ought to be, they should not be off the radar screen for purposes of enforcement. And we do, as you know, there are now moves coming forward to permit councils more scope to deal with traffic regulation orders in ways that might potentially be able to deal with some of that stuff. And it would be interesting to see whether they can be explored to support that aim.
I hope so.
Danny, did you want to come
in? May I take a step back? This country hasn't really dealt with cycling or walking seriously for what, 50 years?
Yeah.
Thanks to efforts of the man to my left and a few others, it started doing that a few years ago. We've got an awful long way to go to become a mature part of the transport mix. Active Travel England is going to be 98 people. There's going to be some stuff we can do, but there's going to be an awful lot of stuff we cannot do. But what we definitely want to start doing is influencing the discussion more and the debate more as a serious stakeholder within the DFT and with obviously our parliamentary colleagues.
Thank you. But I mean, it should not be less safe to go on a cycle path than on a road, and it certainly shouldn't be slower. And that's what we find at the moment.
I mean, it also lets us remind ourselves that that also mean that some cycle users and pedestrians indeed need to be careful about their impact on other people. It's not by any means just a kind of, we're not demonizing one particular group.
No.
I'm going to come on to a group of questions on e-bikes because we had several questions on these in advance. So will you work with the cycle industry and colleagues in other government departments to implement a kite mark for original manufactured e-bike batteries so that they can be trusted when charging at home and out of the home? Please.
Serious concern about this. I think the discussion's underway with the Bicycle Association on this issue. The Office of Product Safety is engaged and we recognise the problem, but we're going to need to have some industry engagement.
Thank you. We'd be very happy as the APPC to help in any way that we can. And I know you might not be able to answer this one as it's not quite your department, but why does HMRC continue to provide tax breaks for e-motor cars, but not specifically for e-bicycles?
Well, since it's now at least a year and a half since I was running HMRC, I feel completely entitled not to comment. I mean, you know, we have a effective cycle to work scheme, and you know, there hasn't been much sign that. I mean, I think it would be lovely to supplement that, but and I can see the argument potentially for further incentives, but the way e-bike prices are falling, we may, you know, maybe that the technology does a lot of the business that we would hope for from the tax code.
And what role do you see shared transport schemes such as e-bike share and e-scooter share in delivering on the decarbonisation active travel and agendas?
I think it's completely foundational. I think it's a marvelous thing about a bike, right? I mean, it has almost no impact on the environment. It keeps you fit and it gets you from A to B off in the quickest possible way. So there's a massive overlap in these agendas, and you know, certainly I plan to be talking a lot about them as Minister to the extent I possibly can.
Thank you. And when can we expect to see simplified zebra crossings on the streets following the trials in Manchester?
It's that Matt and Deegan again. The answer to that is we take the point. I have taken the point about the studies that have been done in Manchester and indeed elsewhere. We have some advice that it's difficult to do nationally, but it's a topic that requires, and it's a slight fudge, but I apologise, but it is true, some further active scrutiny within the department.
Thank you. And can you make it easier for highways authorities to introduce 20-mile-an-hour limits?
Well, we have a local traffic speed order system in place. I'm not absolutely up to speed on how it's working, but there clearly are some mechanisms in place already.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the room? So we're coming out of time.
Hi, Chris Gibson, Pyramid. This is more of addition to the e-bike battery thing. To bring this in from the side, we charge batteries on our premises. There was an e-bike battery fire a few arches down under in a Network Rail arch. It wasn't an entirely legitimate operation. However, we're finding that our lease negotiation is in jeopardy whilst we're using entirely legitimate means of charging and indeed legitimate batteries. So any progress that could be made on the standards would be very, very welcome, because we may find ourselves being moved on through no kind of fault of our own as well.
That's a very helpful intervention. I hope everyone online picked this up from a gentleman who's running a business where another one down the not so far away had a problem with an e-battery, and that seems to be affecting potentially your own lease.
Not just mine.
No, but others.
Anyone that charges batteries within Network Rail.
Yes.
Places.
It also affects the 10,000 people who work in Parliament, because at the moment you're not supposed to charge a battery indoors in this place.
Yes,
because of the nervousness of the fire people here.
I'm not going to comment on the standards being applied on the parliamentary estate, but I take the point, and of course the trouble with, as you know, a kite mark, you know, may get you some distance. it may not take you as far as you want for various different reasons. I do think, let me make a slightly ancillary point there, which is, this is a point that could also be raised in connection with e-scooter batteries and
any mobility battery charging at all. It's not as such for standards per se, but the kind of sword of Damocles hanging over our head. So there's a clarification on whether or not someone can evict us for simply for charging.
Yeah, I don't think I can have anything to say on that in my role, but the point about raising the standards so that someone could have a rational belief that you are an insurable risk based on your adherence to the standards, I think is a valid point, and I think that's the point that's being made.
Yeah. Thank you. So since the departure of Boris from number 10, there is a perception that we no longer have a champion of cycling around the corner. And I just wondered how you saw the emphasis on active travel now, and what more we can all do, because we are here to support, actually, to stop any ground being lost, and how can we keep this agenda moving forward?
Well, you've got a very active travel sitting in front of you, champion. But what I take the points. It is I haven't detected any lack of energy or drive on this. Active Travel England, continues to focus very heavily that we've released the capability money at a time when the rest of government has been managing the implementation of the autumn statement. I've talked about the ATF money that we are expecting, and I think it's up to us all to make this a shared norm and a shared energy in a way that does not make it reliant on the individual human being. And I think it's also important that that vision be one that's encoded in statute and in regulations and institutions, so that we can keep this process moving forward in a way that ultimately guarantees its success.
Thank you. And in light of the government's commitment to reducing carbon emissions to zero by 2050, will we consider setting a target for reducing the number of car journeys as London has done? And if not, do we have a plan for making sure we get there in time?
Well, we as you will be aware, we have the department spends a great deal of time thinking about emissions and thinking about air quality. And it's important not to ignore air quality. Cyclism, I think, does very well compared to some alternatives in terms of air quality. In terms of emissions, as you know, we are framing a zero emissions vehicle mandate as we speak, and that will be something that has the potential to be the largest single decarbonisation measure in transport we've ever enacted. So we are, and we have an independent and highly effective and highly credible carbon budget and climate change committee enforcement mechanism to invigilate transition. So I feel tolerably comfortable about those aspects of things. And I have to say, the zero emission vehicle mandate, if launched, will be path-breaking across Europe and in other parts of the world.
Thank you. And on that positive note, I'm going to hand over to my co-chair, but I would like to say personally a massive thank you for coming along. And it is obviously important we get you away on time. So I am going to hand over to you to close.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Selene, for chairing. Thank you so much, Jessie and Danny. It's good to see you back again. As you've seen, we've changed our name and focus from just cycling to cycling and walking, since you were last in post. And so it's good to be working with you again. And of course, we've been working with Danny since the creation of AT. Thank you to everybody who submitted or asked questions. Thank you as ever to Adam, Jack and team for the organisation. And our next meeting is on the 6th of March. Do we have an indication of the topic?
It's going to be a walking special.
Walking special, brilliant.
Walking special.
Walking special.
Excellent. We should have a walking meeting.
We'll have a walking meeting.
Well, Ruth, so thank you so much, and everyone, Fabian, Ben, Andrew, and others. Thank you very much. I hope you will have noticed that we don't, cavil. We don't spend a lot of time beating around the bush on this. You've asked me a lot of questions. I've been very happy to answer them. And we'll try to bring the same kind of drive and energy to the work we do in the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you.